Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. This is Pat Sherlock. I will be your instructor. We have an exciting session for you today about hiring success in 2019 using pre-hire assessments. Just a quick bio for those that I haven't met that are on the call is that I'm a veteran mortgage sales leader. I have been one for many years and a former head of sales and secondary marketing. And for the last 25 years, my sales consulting business has really helped banks, mortgage companies, and credit unions on this important issue of hiring the right candidates. We've developed a pre-hire assessment for the mortgage industry, and I'm going to share our research today. And also talk about, certainly besides our assessments, I am a sales trainer in this mortgage space and especially teaching lead generation today. But that's another topic for another day. Today I have two experienced mortgage sales leaders that will also be on the webinar later on. And we will talk about their experiences using pre-hires because I know there's always lots of questions. But more on all of that later. I'll speak for about 30-45 minutes and then we'll have our interviews. There'll be time for you to ask questions. But before we start, we just want to do a couple poll questions so we can get a feel for our attendees today. And if you could take a second, our first question is, how many loan officers are you hiring in 2019? And A through D, we have a list of numbers, and certainly in D, we're saying we're thinking about it, but we haven't done it. So take a second for that one, and then we'll move to the second poll question. We have roughly about almost 40% of you are looking to hire 10 or more. It looks like another 20 of you are C, looking like 25% of you are looking to hire more than 20 loan officers. And then we have a third of you that are thinking about it and haven't really decided what they're going to do. And so our second poll question that I'd like you to answer, are your managers hiring the wrong candidates? Again, feel free to select A or B, and certainly no one will see your answers except me. Around 80% of you are saying that you are not hiring the right person, and I'm sure that's probably why you're on this webinar today. The remaining people are saying that it's other external factors. But certainly let's get to the core issue about hiring. Like many of you, I've spent many part of my career hiring originators in my years in mortgage banking. So I certainly know firsthand, and I'm sure many of you also do, how frustrating it can be, especially when you hire somebody that interviews well, and when they join your sales group, they are frankly a disaster and really couldn't sell water in a desert. We've all had that happen. Not only is it frustrating, but it's also can do a lot of damage to your sales group and your sales team's performance for sure. And also the other issue about firing that person, especially when you have hired them, is certainly emotionally draining, and I think all of us have had that experience. So this is why in really 1999, when I started my consulting business, I focused on these efforts of having to provide a hiring manager an objective scientific evaluation of the candidate, a pre-hire for mortgage bankers. While there are many assessments within mortgage banking, certainly those assessments are not specifically for mortgage banking, which I'll explain in a second. So we're going to talk about today the hiring landscape that all of you are experiencing. We'll go into the science of smart hiring, which is what pre-hires need to address essentially to be a valid instrument for mortgage banking. And we'll talk about those criteria because I think a lot of times it's not really understood. We'll talk about, and I'll share certainly how our pre-hire works and how we basically help hiring managers select better. And then we'll have our guests talk about, our two guests, Jason Sasena and Andrew Taylor, very experienced mortgage leaders, and they'll talk about how, what was like before using assessments, then afterwards, and really what that did to their sales group. So that should be certainly very interesting and informative to everybody today. And obviously, as I've already mentioned, submit any of your questions through the chat feature. We will be able to read them. So let's start. Today's hiring challenges, I don't really have to, enumerate them. There are really obviously many of them. It's a very competitive marketplace for every lender. It doesn't matter if you're a bank, a credit union, or a mortgage company, everyone is searching for good talent. And when you think about that, really what has also happened at the same time is hiring the wrong person, the wrong individual, can be really a financial disaster. It's unfortunate within mortgage banking that many lenders really don't put a cost to what hiring the wrong person is. We have done this study many times, and it's roughly around 300,000 per wrong hire. So you can just imagine how many loans you have to originate to really offset that cost. And where does that 300,000 come from? It's a combination of your direct expenses, your indirect expenses of your time and your effort, and then obviously the most important driver is your lost sales opportunities. If you had, and what that all means, if you had a individual that could sell that actually has been identified as having the sales behaviors that are needed to be successful in mortgage banking, that you would have better performance by that individual versus someone that's not. We all really know this. I think, unfortunately, we don't put a number to it, but research after research will tell you it's a significant dollar amount. And certainly it has risen because of what's going on in mortgage banking. Our cost to originate has really dramatically increased. It's roughly now, according to the latest MBA numbers, almost $8,600 a loan. And when you look at that number, roughly 55 to 60% of the number is reflective in loan officer compensation. So when you think about it, that this decision of making really the wrong decision is significantly impactful to the bottom line of a company and a sales group. I often call this issue what I would say is the invisible killer of a company, because the higher your turnover is, and the more non-performers that you have a dramatic impact to the performance of your company. And in these more difficult times of really lower volumes and tighter margins, it's very important that we have the right person in the position. So it's certainly a difficult market. Everyone, and I certainly talk to lenders every day, are certainly focused on this whole issue of finding sales talent. And now we seem to have a little mini refi market going on. This also raises the question of what talent are we going to have that we're going to have in our sales organization. And I think our warm body approach really has led to a lot of these issues. So bottom line is, if too many wrong hires are made, a company really can go out of business. You certainly are seeing a lot of companies consolidating. It is difficult and does require really a revision of how their hiring strategy and structure work. If you are a manager or a group leader, you certainly know the issue of poor performers invariably clog up the back office and really do hurt morale in a significant way. So our hiring challenges are obviously large, but certainly a structured interview process will help identify those that not only have the sales talent, but also match your company's culture and sales process. When you look at the current research, this is information from the Garrett and McCauley report that was just actually issued this week. It's very troubling when you look at the performance numbers that they see across the country in loan officer production. Starting from really our top originators are in the arena of 6 to 7 units a month. When we move to that next group, you're talking about an average of 4 units a month. And this is data from the end of 2018. Obviously, we don't have 2019's data since the quarter just ended. But the most important point is that the remaining quartiles are really all about low performers. And we have 60% of our sales staff are generating really such unbelievably low numbers, anywhere from 1 to 2 units a month. I'm sure many of you have originators that fall into that bracket. So the reality is, again, nationwide, this is a problem throughout our industry and is not really unique to just one lender. And when you look at the data that the MBA peer group provides, again, through Strathmore, it really has conveyed the same information. In fact, I would tell you that when you look at Strathmore's data over many, many years, this framework of having 60% of your originators being unprofitable and low production numbers, those individuals need to be addressed. That's been a message that's been sent throughout the industry for many, many years. I think refi's obviously covered the issue, but now we are into the reality of, with the cost of origination being so high, that lenders need to address that we can't make mistakes in our hiring and have to recognize that as a company, the more mistakes that we make, therefore the more poor performers we have, it's obvious that the lender is going to have a difficult financial situation, and even the issue about even surviving. So if they can't sell, if they are order takers, we need to know that during the interview process, and we need to use tools that help us identify that. And this applies, I mean, we've done analysis from the retail side, the third-party originations, and also from consumer direct. So it's the same issue. We're just showing you the retail numbers because I think obviously most of you on the call today are in retail. So what is the solution? I mean, that really is what it comes down to. And I think it is that companies need to address really the science of smart hiring. And all of that is about, when you think about it, we do it with our analysis of credit risk. Again, whether you're using DU or any of the technology, they are evaluating the credit risk, just like Fair Isaacs is. Well, we can do the same thing with people and candidates that are applying for origination position. And that's by using really scientific research that would identify and predict the success of the candidate and whether those people will be above average originators or those that are not. And this is all should be part of a structured interview process that are what best practices of what companies are doing. And so based on science, what we're talking about is taking data analysis and predicting the originator's success factor. This is not something that is a new issue, but it's something for the mortgage industry that they need to become more serious about. We have found, and I'll share when we get into more detail about the pre-hire side of it, that the length of time, let's say your experience level, these behaviors are so early on formed that really the longer you're within mortgage bankers doesn't mean that mortgage banking doesn't mean that you're going to become improved in these behaviors. These are really behaviors that the individual has early on developed in their life. And we as hiring managers need to identify that during the interview process. So smart hiring is based on science, and that's based on really recognizing two important criteria when you're looking at pre-hire assessments. And the first is the validity component of it. A good pre-hire is all about being valid. And valid is this issue of doing a scientific analysis of the criteria for that position. So in other words, when you're looking at a sales position, you are looking at not just any sales position, but a mortgage sales position, which is different than other types of selling professional jobs. And so these standards have been established by the EEOC in many different pronouncements that they have made. So the assessment needs to be valid. That means there needs to be scientific analysis of the position by looking at data, and data is in our industry is obviously production numbers. So that is certainly the driver of whether the test is valid. And then the next component of being valid is that the sample size that is done in the prediction has to be larger than 50. Many times you will see assessment companies talking about they'll do benchmarking and they'll look at your top 10 high performers, and then they'll say that they will customize that report to those top 10 that you gave them. That's really scientifically not a valid sample size because it's not large enough, and you actually have to be looking at more than just your top producers. You need to look at the middle and the low performers. That's what makes prediction more accurate. And the second component of an effective pre-hire is really the reliability. And that's all about, does it consistently analyze the skills being assessed? In other words, is everyone that is being tested is tested the same way? and are they being analyzed in the same way? So it's really two components to that. And so for pre-hire assessment, for any of you that are looking at them, certainly your top two questions is looking for a validation study where they are showing their scientific analysis of that position regarding the assessment. And the second part of it has to do with the reliability. Is every candidate treated the same? And that does certainly apply to, they should be able to give you an adverse impact study where, in other words, protected groups aren't impacted. So you need to look at it from the standpoint of the two issues. And the third part is a practical issue. It's really what I call ease of use. In other words, obviously, in the old days, it was pen and pencil, and it was really a laborious effort. Today, it should be all web-based, and it should be all an easy report to read. A lot of assessments really are only designed for other psychologists to read them. You obviously do not want that. You want business language. And then let me share about our pre-hire assessment, where and why it's effective within mortgage banking. Obviously, we're validated for that position. And so because of that, we are really predicting. We are not a DISC instrument where it's based on communication skills, which is many of you are familiar with DISC and Myers-Briggs and all of those other types of DISC-based assessments. Those assessments are not predictive. In other words, are just a series of really analyzing something that has really been designed for communication and not for anything else. A prediction tool is actually that, where they are standing by how they're predicting that particular candidate's going to perform. In our case, we're 70% accurate, and so what that means to you is that the individual 7 out of 10 times we're going to be right on with selecting whether that individual is above average. And so it's really important for you to recognize that in an assessment, their scientific analysis needs to be on production numbers, and that's a series of looking at units and dollars, looking at them geographically, and also looking at them from the standpoint of analyzing the performance of the top producers, the middle producers, and the low producers. You cannot just benchmark 10 top producers and say, this is really going to help you. So when you think about it, the analytical component is very similar to FICO scoring, where we are performing a probability analysis to help you in the sequence of your interviewing process. And as a result, it should be early on that sequence, because what we're answering is the question, do they have the sales talent to be effective in mortgage banking from an origination position? And so all in all, once you have known that, then your interview needs to focus on, do they fit our culture, and then do they fit our sales process? So what we're doing is answering the question, can they sell? And so here is just a sample of some differences that I've already mentioned to you. So how was this all developed? Again, as I've already explained to you, I've been in mortgage banking, a head of sales in my own past career. And so this was an issue that I obviously saw firsthand. And so part of the original analysis, which was done basically around the year 2000 and has been validated many times since then, is that we asked mortgage companies to be part of a validation study where we did analyze the production numbers. And what's interesting about all of this, and we have done this several times, many times actually through all these years, because obviously markets change. And what's interesting about it is the behaviors that are needed at the originator level haven't really changed, even though obviously our market is different today than it was 5 years ago. So it's important to remember that regardless of whether you're in third-party retail or consumer direct, we have a set of behaviors that we need to have in our salespeople, and this is really how this has all been designed. And so let's delve a little bit more into what we have found. You will understand kind of where this helps you in the screening process. There's really kind of 5 parts to a report, and the first part is the most important part, is where we're making a prediction component where we're saying that move forward with the candidate or not move forward. It's pretty clear, which I will show you in a second. And then obviously what we also do is we tie together behavioral-based questions off of what we have identified as weak behaviors, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we provide other information. We provide training information on what did they know about consultative selling, so you would know as a hiring manager, should I emphasize overcoming objections, trainings for that person versus is the person need help in prospecting? Again, every individual is different, and by how they've answered a questionnaire where they've been presented different sales scenarios, that's how we figure out what training information they need. And then finally, we are also providing motivational information. In other words, every individual, every top performer, every low performer, in other words, everyone is motivated in a different way. What we're providing you is what is their motivation. It's common in mortgage banking to think that it's all about money. Actually, we really don't see that with above average originators. Certainly there are some like that, but most of the above originators are motivated by developing expertise and achievement. And that's important for you to know. But again, no motivation is better than another. There are 8 well-established motivators within psychology, and from that, we are telling you what that is. You don't have to guess. And that's important for the manager to know when they go to manage the individual, because you might assume that everybody's about money and emphasizing changing basis points, but the fact of life is it may not be that, and certainly that's important for you to know. So what you're seeing here is what we call kind of our profile page, and that is that we are analyzing, as already mentioned, their personality behaviors, their sales knowledge, and the sales motivators. But the box that really ties into whether the individual is given the green light to go forward is really only the first box. So what we have found over 20 years of analysis in the mortgage space is that there's a set of 9 personality traits, which I'll talk about more in a second. And these traits, again, are traits that early on are established, and the individual needs to really have each one of these traits in some proportion in order for them to get the green light. As you see in this slide, there are 3 boxes down the bottom where we're actually making our prediction, and our prediction is 2 green boxes to represent to go forward and 1 red box. If you fall into the red box, what we're saying is that that person has less than a 50% chance to be successful within mortgage origination. Roughly around a third of the candidates fall into that arena. The other 2/3 do pass. And so let's look at what are those 9 personality traits. And again, I don't know that some of these will be surprising to you, but I do think that from accommodation standpoint, that's really what is important to evaluate in every candidate that you speak to. So the 9 personality traits that are shown in this slide, starting with energetic all the way down to positive about people, you will see lines next to those individual personality traits, and then you'll see a box. The box is where the candidate fell. The line represents graphically where the candidate needs to fall. So when the box falls outside of that line on that individual trait, that's actually not a good thing. And so when you look at the first 6 traits, from energetic, and follow through is all about a task orientation, being optimistic, resilience, assertive is about the need to persuade, and social is about the personality trait of liking to help people. Those 6 traits are very similar in other sales positions in many industries. You need to have a high level of energy. Average energy for a mortgage originator or other sales positions is really a weakness. You need to be followed through because obviously your word is your bond. Being optimistic, as you all know, is important because certainly every day can be different challenges, and so optimistic people see the world as half full and not half empty. Resilience, you get turned down a lot. We all know that. And likewise, assertiveness is this issue when you are presented with, let's say, an objection that you have the personality trait to need to persuade. It's not being argumentative and it's not being aggressive. It means that you will respond and think on your feet. And social, again, as I've already mentioned, is liking to help people. Mortgage banking, we deal with all kinds of different people every different day. So all those 6 traits are really important traits and critical traits to be successful. But we also have 3 other traits that are really kind of unique to mortgage banking selling. And I think this is a lot of times what ends up happening, where during the interview we can be really overwhelmed by the person and not really objectively and doing an analysis of what's innately within that person. And they are these traits. These 3 traits, they're really unique to mortgage banking origination, is expressiveness. It's quite common for many sales professionals, this whole issue of having the gift of gab. It's common for many people to think that the gift of gab is what makes a person successful. What we have found over all these years of research is that what actually works in mortgage banking is low expressiveness. That's why the line's on the left-hand side and not on the right-hand side. Low expressiveness is an individual that's more reserved, more listener. It's a whole different type of quality. And I think sometimes when we look at who we think top producers are, we really do mislot them from the get-go. So low expressiveness is a critical trait. And when I say critical, we're looking for positive correlations between the personality trait that they've been asked in a questionnaire and production numbers. That's how we really linking what actually matters. The next one is really critical in mortgage bank, and it doesn't matter if you're in third party, you're in retail, or you're in consumer direct. Our business is all about being self-reliant, and that means being a self-starter. So that's, again, you can be in other types of selling positions and not be a self-starter. In other words, you could be fed leads in pharmaceutical sales to get a territory. In other words, you can have that type of selling, but that's not mortgage banking. Mortgage banking is dependent upon having self-reliant people. And then finally, positive about people. In other types of mortgage, other types of selling positions, you may not need to be positive about people, but in mortgage banking, you must be. We deal with, again, all types, as we all know, from first-time home buyers to all kinds of individuals. And so this is a business where if you're negative about people, it's not going to bode well as far as your success is considered. So all 9 of the traits are how the person is evaluated, and from that, we are able to come up with where the individual candidate fits in our 3 boxes, which are avoid, good, and better. And so reality is that the individual candidate needs to have some combination of these traits, and certainly that's what really will drive whether the candidate passes the pre-hire. The 2 other traits that do not have lines next to them, those traits are, we find that lenders want to know, is the person serious about the position? And the final trait is accommodating. I have many customers, many lenders, that accommodating is an important trait for them because they are looking at really answering the question, is the person coachable? But again, from our viewpoint, the 9 traits are what matter. The 2 other traits are traits that we're just providing for information standpoint. As already mentioned, we also do analysis on how much do they know about consultative selling. As we all know, mortgage banking origination is all about relationship building, but you have to have the skills. You obviously need the behaviors you need the behaviors as kind of your foundation, but you need to have the skills. This will tell the hiring manager where they are weak on. When we look at this particular listing of the 6 parts to consultative selling, we're talking about that, prospecting wasn't a strength of them. First meeting wasn't really another strength of them. So this particular individual needs help on those particular skill sets. And likewise, influencing and is another one that's been designated as a skill level that needs to be improved. Again, while it's not predictive of whether the person will be good in sales, it does tell you where they have sales training needs. As already mentioned about the motivational side of it, again, every individual can have whatever motivator, but as a manager and you're dealing with these individuals, it's important for you to know what motivates them. And in this case, the individual is really strongly motivated, by this whole issue, recognition, again, It's all different, but the point is this tells you because the candidate has really answered a questionnaire in a way that gives you that insight. And then when we move forward from some other content that the report provides is that we take when they've been identified weakness in a personality component that we really have given you customized personal behavior questions that if you were going to continue the interviewing with the candidate, that your hiring manager or your HR side would know the questions to ask because we're identifying what has been weak. This is a part that's really very popular in the report because it does uniform this issue of everybody that identifies for the manager what to really delve into, and likewise this whole issue of what questions to ask. You don't want your managers just asking about pipeline questions. You want the whole structured approach to be more in depth on that individual. And then the final part of the report is we kind of wrap it up in business terms where we're saying, okay, we know what the person has been identified as having weaknesses. What does it mean to manage this individual? This information is just a wrap up. When you have low energy, that means that handling a demanding work pace is not going to be the strength of the individual. So again, depending upon the individual's identified weaknesses is what's going to generate not only the behavioral questions, but likewise what it would be like to manage the individual. So when do you use pre-hires in interviewing? We certainly would recommend that it's early in the process. Doesn't have to be the first contact. It can be after you initially have met with or had a phone call with someone that you're trying to recruit. And then at that point, if they're interested in the position, then you would be asking them to take the pre-hire assessment, because the pre-hire assessment is again identifying not who you shouldn't spend time with and who you should, and then it's telling you questions to help you in that interview process. So the earlier the better, and I would tell you that that's usually after there's some indication that the candidate is interested in joining your company or your team. So this is a good time to really kind of take a few minutes and talk to some experts, some sales leaders that have spent many years in mortgage banking and certainly have had experience with the QFS Pre Hire. As mentioned, let me just tell you a little bit about Jason and Andrew. Jason's been in the mortgage business almost 25 years. He's been in every type of position where he's been with certainly banks, also mortgage companies, and certainly many years with the credit unions. He was sales leader for Lake Michigan Credit Union recently, and certainly Connect Credit Union in California. Both institutions were large originators of mortgage production and certainly had large selling staffs. He's also been active, he's a CMB, and has been active in participating in MBA activities in addition to the Mortgage Professional Handbook, which he wrote a great article on. And then certainly Andrew Taylor is our second executive that we're going to be talking to. And Andrew has been, again, 25 years in mortgage banking. He co-founded the wholesale side for Franklin American. He likewise had been in third party, correspondent. He was a broker at one time, so certainly has been involved for many years with hiring originators and this whole process of identifying who would work out and who wouldn't is certainly his lifetime experience. So let's talk to Andrew first. Hey, Andrew. Thanks for
having
joining.
me on today.
Yeah, thanks for joining. I certainly appreciate it. Andrew, I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, again, you've hired many, I guess at this point, hundreds of originators over all the years. And I know that you've had firsthand issues. You have people that are good interviewers, but then are bad originators, bad salespeople. Why don't you kind of share kind of how hard it was to get your managers to go to more of a scientific approach where you're using a pre-hire in your evaluation?
Sure. When you get into this business, at least I can speak for me, I wasn't taught how to interview people.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it was really just a free-for-all gut reaction, a chit-chat, didn't really know the questions to ask, to dig deep into one's sales ability and personality. And so, I was at Franklin American for 23 years and we grew it from, with just two of us to start with. So we never really had an HR department or anybody that could teach us. So we just had to figure out how to interview. And, we made plenty of mistakes over the years. And, the turnover wasn't the best. And, we had success, obviously, but, we had those that didn't do well and, they went away. So turnover was bad at the beginning. And so I thought there had to be a system or a process to do this. And so we, developed a template, so to speak. And, I found Pat pretty early on, or she found me. I can't remember. It's been so long ago.
Yeah.
But, and what attracted me is not only the sales assessment where you could dig into the intangibles of what makes a successful originator. Because, like she mentioned, most of the tests out there that the MI companies have, et cetera, are very generic and they're for all industries. But her assessment is very specific to the mortgage business, which is, unique. I'm sure everybody on this call, no one has seen anything that specific.
Mm-hmm.
And, that, and then, beyond just, Pat's sales assessment, she actually has another webinar or seminar or whatever you'd like to call it, where she can teach this template, in the process and the science of interviewing. So, it really improved our turnover. We grew to the 7th largest wholesaler in the country. And a lot of that, I think is because we became better interviewers and better hirers. Obviously to be a better hirer, you have to be a better interviewer. And we spent a lot more time and had a system and used, Pat's assessment as a tool to help us and really dig deep and ask the right questions.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I certainly appreciate the great words. And certainly, just as my own little 2 cents, the science side in selling was always of interest to me. And as an ex-manager, I really viewed it that way. And I do think a lot of times in mortgage banking, and I'm sure this is your experience too, there's a lot of leaders that think that it's more of an art, and it isn't. This is something that our talent evaluation is something that is really more scientific based. And although many lenders may not think that, that is really the case. And I'm sure when you went to roll it out with your managers that reported to you, your regional managers, was that hard to do? Or in other words, was there real resistance that you had? Or kind of talk about that?
I think there was some skepticism just because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, so to speak, and
Sure.
and people are they don't like change, and I just felt like that there was a science to it and a system, and so we implemented, we tried it, and got their buy-in slowly, and I had Pat come explain the assessment in full detail and what it meant.
Sure.
And, I think slowly over time they saw that it worked.
Right.
And it helped their hiring. And you spend all that time and effort, and as you mentioned, a lot of money to hire someone, and then to have them not work out and have to start over. No one likes that. And so it's really crucial to evaluate the talent, early on. And, I think that most people in the mortgage business, tend to have high turnover because they don't know how to interview. And so they were looking for something to help them get better. And so they gave it a chance and they saw that it worked and they bought in.
Yeah, I mean, from a period of time, I mean, in my experience, I see with other lenders, maybe it's a 3 to 6 month, maybe the first 3 months they're a little skeptical, but after a while, they're not, and it's not an issue. Is that your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. You start slow, you try it, and like I said, they see that it worked, and they were tired of spending a lot of effort, on people that didn't work out, and so they were looking for something to help them. And when they saw it worked, like I said, they bought in and accepted it, and we used it for every candidate.
Right. So that does raise this issue, and maybe talk a little bit about the turnover component with it. But I think you got down to the low 20%. Is that correct? If I remember, you went from like 100%, you were having a treadmill going on, and then you went down to really the low 20s. And that's really unique in the third party space.
Yeah, we did. We had the high turnover, and the cost was tremendous to with the turnover. And so it really did reduce it down dramatically. And, we had very long tenured sales force because we hired right. And, if you don't hire right, then you're already behind the curve. And, you have to assess the talent, the raw talent, which the assessment does, and really digs deep into that and pulls out the intangibles of a successful salesperson in the mortgage business. And it, we made better hires. And so therefore our turnover was a lot lower.
Right. And I also have to give really a salute to yourself. Certainly one of the things that I see that it's at the senior leadership level. If they're not serious on this topic, then nothing will get supported. But in your case, I know this was an important issue for you and you were serious about it. And certainly I think that's what made, Franklin American's third party side so successful for all those years.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's true. We'll have a section here where we can ask questions to Andrew and Jason. So so Andrew, thank you. And I'm going to go to Jason for just a second here. Okay, Jason, you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Great.
Yeah. Jason, I wanted to kind of hear, you've been in all these positions and certainly have hired many, many hundreds of originators over all these years. And I know you've had this experience of someone that interviews well and then turns out to be a bad salesman and doesn't really get off the gate. Kind of talk about how hard was it for you when you're leading these groups to have it rolled out to the rest of the management?
Yeah, and I think it goes down just to the root situation with the industry is typically your sales management is compensated, sometimes highly compensated based on the production that they're yielding on a monthly or an annual basis. So whether you're in a growth market and you need to add folks to fill up a market, or if you're even in a full market where you might have a full roster, you still need to continue to recruit and obviously retain. So you're always recruiting. Mm-hmm. And I think we put the pressure on our sales managers that, we got to go find some production. But I think defining that a little bit better goes along with what both you and Andrew spoke about today. So, having the right production is really key. When we hire folks, there is a cost or a profit opportunity there. We've got reputation within the market. Those folks are going to wear, the jersey up front is our brand, but then their brand is on the back of that jersey. So we're mutually in the market from a reputational perspective and how the market looks at us. And then ultimately, I think we've made decisions, or I've certainly, unfortunately, made some decisions where I've taken production over culture. And sometimes that's hard, to your question. So when you find out about somebody in the market that you think would be good on your team, you might warm up to it. Everybody's salespeople, so getting to like each other in a short conversation or even over time and social aspects is relatively easy. But I thought, I thought this service that you have, Pat, and obviously we've been utilizing it for quite some time over a couple of different companies, just allowed us to create a true process. And to your point, from the adaption perspective is, when you step back and just look at what that opportunity is, and then you look at the staff that you have to deploy it, it's really what's the opportunity from a people, process, technology, and do you have the right people on your team? So we're talking about people. If you're in senior management, you're looking at your sales managers. You have the right sales managers. They're going to help you hire the right people within those sales roles. And utilizing the pre-hire assessment is that technology component or a tool that you would apply to your process, and we've done that. And staying disciplined to that is extremely critical, because we all get a little happy sometimes when we have a large producer in the room and we think we have the opportunity to kind of land it on the first interview, but maybe that's not always the best approach. And I've seen that go good and I've seen it go bad. Right. So absolutely having that process. To be a little more specific to your question, how hard was it to adapt? I think you just really got to back things up and slow it down a little bit. We tend to always want to go on the sales side, but really just backing it up to more of that strategy mindset and saying, what does our growth market really look like? What are the type of people we really want to have on the team? What's the product mix that we want to acquire so that we're having, well-balanced production, from not only if you have a portfolio or if you have investors or if you have a warehouse line or even into the capacity side, what's the right fit? So model matching and things like that. And then just, I don't think anybody's really new in sales management nowadays. So being able to kind of reflect on, what are some of those pains and what are those successes, and then getting them to drill down and say, okay, so the most successful people, what do they look and feel like? And then what are those bad decisions that we've made as sales managers? Because that was our fault, not theirs. So when we made a bad decision, then what did those people look like? And then if you try to work that through, I think you'll find that your sales management team would actually appreciate some additional tools so you have a well-rounded interviewing process. One of the other things I was thinking about as I was kind of preparing for this was it's an interesting market, and it always is an interesting market, but I think we're in a very transitional market where people are making moves over the last few months. We were all doing pretty good there for a while, so it was a little bit of stagnant. And just depending on what you're looking for, I've met with different companies that all it is about is numbers, so what's the head count, what's the production, nothing else matters. And I think you have higher attrition in those types of organizations. So then what's the true profitability of that decision and that strategy? You've got others that are trying to be more strategic, and that, culture plays an equal part in production. And so if you don't have those right tools and you're not taking the right steps, then it's very hard to make a sound decision, because we all have tools that tell us how much production somebody has done in a market. It's not hard to figure out how much production somebody's done. You could start looking at Scotsman guides, and there's different tools out there, but there's not many tools for a culture hire or a motivation hire or an energy hire or how they get that production. And so I found that the pre-hire assessment helps my team ask better questions, and through asking better questions, we're able to make a judgment on them. But at the same time, we're showing them, because it is an interview process, a two-way interview process, we're showing that candidate that we're a well-organized organization. We're strategic in nature. We're here for the long haul. Most people that have moved around have had a bad experience where they thought they were making the right decision. They made a move and it ended up being too quick of a move. So don't be foolish that they're not interviewing just as hard, as we're interviewing them. And I think this just kind of sets us above the rest of those folks that are just like, okay, how much production you did? Yeah, great. How much money do you want? All right, let's start on Tuesday. So it's just a different process that I think has yielded a different outcome. You asked a little bit about some attrition rates, and I can tell you that in my last role here at Lake Michigan, I didn't measure attrition rate because it wasn't an important KPI for me, because it wasn't a problem. That was not the case for majority of my career. Attrition was definitely one of the primary KPIs for my teams. I think a lot of it's just having that right process and making the right fit. Saying no is probably sometimes more important than saying yes in these types of roles, which is a challenge when you got high producing folks sitting in front of you.
Right. No, I mean, all great points. And the one thing that I would say today, you did raise a great issue, that I do think that since everyone is looking for talent, and I'm interested in your thoughts, is that your A players aren't going to move that easily. So you are looking at B and C players, and many of the C players are who are available. So if you have no way of evaluating the C players or B players, then you're left with, by definition, a sales force that is really, you might be hiring bodies, but you really aren't going to get the production that you're looking for. You're hiring another 2-unit month player. That's what it boils down to. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is probably easier said than done, and I think everybody on the call would agree with that. But you don't always get the choice of hiring just A and B players. So you may have to hire a C player because you're in a new market. You're trying to get a foothold, and you can raise that bar as you go. But I think the difference is if you hire a C player knowing they're a C player and you understand their strengths and weaknesses in the detail that's provided in the pre-hire, it at least now gives you a coaching plan. And so you could hold your sales manager to like, okay, we're going to take a flyer, quote unquote, on this C player, and we understand the strengths and weaknesses. So then sales manager, what's your coaching plan to help get this person up to the next level? Because more than likely a C player doesn't want to be a C player. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but more than likely they want to take this as a new opportunity and a growth opportunity with your organization. So what's that coaching plan look like? And I think if you could be a little bit more strategic in knowing and understanding what you got, and then knowing and understanding what that coaching model looks like, then you've got an opportunity for success in hiring C players.
That's a great point. Here's the first question. The question is, when recruiting, having a pre-hire, does that push away your candidates that are top producers? I'm sure that's a question I get all the time, so I'm not surprised they're asking that question.
We never had anybody really complain about it, to be honest with you, Pat. I mean, there might have been a little bit of pushback, but we wanted to set a different standard and a higher bar, and have a very professional approach. And if they weren't willing to participate in that, then we weren't going to be willing.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Jason, what about you?
I think if you a lot of sales goes down, and recruiting is a sales process. So I think a lot of it has to do with setting proper expectations.
Right.
So if you talk through it and you let people know that, hey, looks like we like to get to know each other over coffee. I don't really want to know too much about anything but getting to know you. And then the next step is more, let's talk about the business and the opportunities, and kind of that. And then from there, we require a pre-hire assessment. It's not to judge you or compare you. It just helps us understand a little bit more about what drives you. And most of your A players, what I found to be successful is a group interview where you bring them on site. So if they're getting serious, they want to come on site. They want to talk to your operations manager. They want to talk to your head of secondary. They want to talk to the head of marketing. They want to talk to all these folks. And so I think it helps prepare your team for that process. And I think that those folks do appreciate that you have quality questions and they actually took the time to get to know them as you're walking in the door. So you don't spend, basically the first 15 minutes of every 30-minute interval
Mm-hmm.
learning more about the basic questions that you have to answer over and over again. It gets annoying. So I think if you set proper expectations, you'll get them to do it. And if they don't, back to Andrew's point, those are the people that aren't showing up for your sales training. They're not showing up for your manager meetings.
Right.
And they're just a complete pain in the butt. So do you want to deal with it now or later?
Yeah, that's a great point too. Well, I want to thank both of you for sharing your thoughts. So certainly, as already been explained, the science approach to hiring is available for you to implement, and we have a 20-year record of predicting mortgage sales success. So certainly corporately, what this does for you is improve your results because you're now hiring better people. And the more we're able to eliminate the C players coming into our lender shop, the better off we all are. And so there's two programs that we have. One program is certainly look at how many originators you're looking to hire, which many of you already indicated, and you would have a personalized, customized site in your company's name. The 10 tests, it's a minimum order of 10 tests and $199 a test. We also have a new program, which is really what we call the As Needed program, and this is a program where you would tell us who you want interviewed because you're not interviewing that many of them, and we would provide the testing instructions and the report to you. That's $269 a report, and certainly it's up to you which reports. The higher the volume, there are obviously volume discounts. When you look at the ROI for pre-hire assessments, this slide really talks about it. For further information about pre-hire or to start on this program, certainly give me a call. The numbers are located on the slide, and certainly my email address is there. We do have other assessments, the processor assessment and the sales manager assessments, but today we only talked about the originator assessment. So have a great day. Thanks for joining the webinar today.